Hey everybody, Cole here with Classic Mini DIY, and on today's episode, we are going to be installing both a front and a rear anti-roll bar. So stay tuned for that. All right, everyone. On today's exciting episode, we are finally going to be installing something I have been wanting to install in my car for pretty much the whole time I've owned it, and that is a front and rear anti-roll bar. Now, for those of you who don't know what an anti-roll bar is, let me give you a little bit of an education. Now, on modern cars, you have something that is sometimes referred to as a sway bar, but what it's actually doing is preventing body roll on your modern or classic car. Now, the intention of these bars is to transfer the force that is being exerted on one wheel to the other wheel. So what's happening is as a wheel is going and getting pressed up, it is in turn pushing the other wheel down via a metal bar that runs between the two wheels and connects them. Now, the main goal of these anti-roll bars is to improve the handling of your car and make it drive and feel and behave in a much safer way. Now, a Classic Mini is a little bit of a special case in reference to an anti-roll bar. They never came stock with an anti-roll bar, and in general, you don't need one on your car, but you can get the same benefits that you would normally get out of a modern car in a Mini and really just bring the handling of this car to the next level. And for those of you who've driven a Classic Mini before, you already know that this car is basically like a cat on Velcro around corners, and adding an anti-roll bar is just going to bring you that little bit above what is already an incredible platform. Now, with modern cars, it's much more important for you to have something like this, because with all of that weight and all of the just things that are happening on these more modern and bigger cars, especially big vehicles, you'll find that this is necessary to help keep the car from walking off the road if you hit weird bumps or go around a corner in a weird way. It can improve the handling and safety of your car pretty dramatically. In a Mini, it's really about performance. So I don't want you guys to feel like you absolutely have to get one of these for your car. You don't, but it's really gonna improve the way your car feels, especially a rear anti-roll bar. The front anti-roll bar is arguably a little less important, but since I have a wonderful part sponsor who has sponsored this episode of Classic Mini DIY, 7 Mini Parts, if you guys don't know who they are, they provide all of the stock, OEM, replacement, and some very cool race car parts for my Classic Mini. If you guys want to support the channel and want to support a wonderful independent business here in the US, check out the link in my description to 7 Mini Parts. All the links to the products I put in my description are affiliate links and help me on this channel, as most of the parts that I purchase are out of my own pocket. I don't get free parts a ton of the time, although I do every once in a while. And using those links gives me a kickback while you also just purchase the products at their normal price. So the two kits that I'm using today are the Fortech Racing, which is 7 Mini Parts branded race department, their own front anti-roll bar and a rear anti-roll bar. And I'm gonna show you guys how to install these properly on the car, and then I'm gonna give you guys a little bit of a rundown of what it feels like after these are installed, bring you on a little test drive. So first things first, let's start off with the front one. It's a little bit easier to install, and then we'll move into the back and take the slightly harder install process. Overall, it's not very difficult to install these. The main thing is that you will need at least 2 jack stands and a jack to do this, because you need your car's wheels to be perfectly even when we're installing them. So anyways, let's get into and underneath the front of the car, and I'll show you guys how to install these suckers. Now, first up, let's talk about the hardware kit. This hardware kit comes with a few different things. First up, we have our rubber bushings that come in the kit. These clamp onto your existing tie rod ends. It is strongly recommended that this kit only get installed on Minis that have uprated heavy-duty tie rod ends, which I'll show you I have on my car here. And you can see what those look like. They actually clamp directly to them, so you don't have to drill or cut or do anything like that. This bolts directly up to your semi-stock suspension system. So let's get the car off the ground, and then I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now in the front suspension of every Mini, there's something called a front tie rod. This tie rod extends between your subframe and your lower control arm and connects your hub to the front of the car. While you're doing a job like this, it's a really good opportunity to check the rubber bushings that are connecting your front subframe to this tie rod end, because this is a very common failure point, and when that fails, you lose all sorts of steerability, drivability, and can cause some serious damage to your car. I have had these fail before when I have gotten into an accident. I hit a curb at one point due to an idiot who pulled out in front of me. The main thing here is that you want to check all of this stuff while you're down here and you're doing this work. To install this properly, you need your wheels and your suspension to be level. And one of the easiest ways to do this, assuming your car's ride height is set up evenly, you can jack up your car to the point where your wheels are both off of the ground at what I call full droop. And at that point, your suspension should be pretty damn close to level. Now the easiest way to get this all hooked up here, and it'll take a little bit of doing, but you go ahead and put the rubber bushing on your existing tie rod here. It's very simple. It has a split in it, so you can feed that right over it. And it will need to, so we'll go ahead and put both of those on right now. And you'll find that your new kit has some brackets that are already in place. That's going to be the first one that you want to install. And the easiest way to do this is just get underneath the car, put your metal bracket over the bushing here, kind of in place. Get two of your bolts ready. And these have locking nuts on them, so you won't have to use a spring washer or anything like that. And then it is the kind of simple task of lifting this into place. And you aren't going to want to get it super tight just yet. You just want to get this kind of in place. And then you're going to take your tie rod and you're going to hold it in place. And I recommend getting yourself a zip tie or some sort of cable tie and going around your tie rod here and looping it. I'm going to do this on the other tie rod so it'll hold itself up a little bit better. But with a loop here, you can then feed your sway bar in here and let it sit in place and hang on the other side while you bolt up this side. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in on the other tie rod here. It doesn't need to be, cinched down all the way because it's literally just there to kind of assist you in holding it in place. And you'll move this around until you get it to the position you like, which can be a little finicky, so, prepare yourself here. Fair warning, the rubber bushing will want to fight you as you put this in here, so you're gonna have to exercise your pinchers as you're doing this. All right, and so now, first one's on. All we want to do is kind of adjust this a little bit so that it's clearing all of your bumper and everything. And then we are going to put the other side on loosely as well. It's the same process of simply clamping down this existing bracket on here over the rubber that is now on your tie rod. Now with that installed, the next step is to move it around here, shift it around, and you want to make sure that it is even between the two tie rods here. And that will look like it having equal space between the two of them across both sides, and they'll both be ending about the exact same place on your tie rod here. It's important that you do this, and this is why it's so important that the car is level, because if it isn't, or these tie rod ends, the adjustments are off, something like that, it can affect the geometry of the car and make it behave kind of unusually. So just make sure that they are even on both sides. You can get a measuring tape out and measure those up. And then once that is done, you're going to want to mount the rear portion of your tie rod. And what I would recommend is getting it as far down towards the end here as you can, to provide a little bit of a buffer between the tie rod and your new bushings. The bushings that you'll be using are the thicker ones, the wider ones. These are for the actual sway bar or anti-roll bar, as opposed to the tie rod itself. All right, you can see that's mounted way down to the back here. And you take your two metal clamps with this, and they'll get connected up in the exact same way. All right, and with that, the anti-roll bar is installed. You can see it spans right across the front side of the car, underneath the front bumper, and right in front of the front subframe. It connects to both sides of your tie rod via these clamps, and we're ready to roll, or not roll. All right, so the next part of this job is where it gets a little bit more complicated. Now, what we're looking at here is the back side of my brake hub on the rear of the car. So this is my rear wheel, and you'll notice the brake is disengaged. That's going to be important here in a minute. But what we're going to be doing is installing the drop brackets for our rear sway bar, rear anti-roll bar. The way that these work is they kind of sit on top of this rear brake bracket here. You can see all this stuff is pretty worn on the back of my car. I'm not going to replace it right now because I don't have replacement parts, but when you're doing this is actually a really great opportunity to replace these things. Old rusty bits, and then you'll notice my HEL brake line here is probably the nicest thing on the back of this brake hub. But what we're going to be doing is taking the wheel off, and I'll show you guys the other side as well, taking the drum off, getting these two bolts out right here, replacing them with the longer bolts that come in the new 7 mini parts anti-roll bar kit. And then this sits kind of up on top of this bracket here. It's crazy. It doesn't look like it's going to fit, but I can assure you it will fit, and it fits actually really, really nicely. So I'm going to set this off to the side. The first thing we need to do is get this pin out here, and it actually looks like the cotter pin down here broke, or just, well, it's not there anymore. This gets popped out. This has a little retractor, and you can kind of toss that off to the side. Now our brake is free. And the next step is we are going to disconnect these two nuts, and then we'll flip to the other side, and I'll show you the bolts on the other side here. Bracket comes off, and actually this was installed in kind of not quite the correct way. This normally sits right up against the hub with just a washer in between it. And I actually put the nuts on here. I double nutted it here, which is not the right way to do this. But anyway, let's get the wheel off, and then I'll show you where these bolts exist on the inside of the hub. Now for this next part, you might look at this and think there is no way that bolt is going to come out, but there is just enough room for that bolt to kind of angle its way out and disconnect it here on this hub, which is really nice and convenient. It means that you don't have to take apart your hub, take the hub off or anything. The wheel bearings on this are relatively new, so I don't want to replace them. Not right now, at least. So what we're going to do is get that bolt off, get those nuts off on the back side, and then we'll flip back over to the other side, and I'll show you guys how we're going to reinstall the bracket with the new drop bracket installed. Now these new ones are a good bit longer, and they go in the same way. The other ones came out pretty straightforward. Just got to feed that in here, just like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and put the other bolt in as well. They'll come assembled like this with all of the nuts and stuff on them. So you'll want to take off the top here and this bottom nut. This bottom nut right here is the one that is going to be holding the old bracket in place before you put the new bracket on top of it. All right, both of those are through. Now we are going to put our parking brake bracket back on here. And now if you have the HEL lines or any other lines, you might see This needs a little bit of clearancing. You might need to break this loose, which would mean you need to re-bleed the brakes just to position it down. As you can see on mine, we're in good shape, so I don't need to do that, thankfully. I did on the other side. And now you're putting the lock washer, the spring washer, and then the gold nut here in place on both of these. All right, so with those in place, the next step is installing your new bracket here. So one thing to keep in mind is you see this bolt right here, this one that goes through the bracket and into this little metal post thing, that needs to be tightened before you put this on. Otherwise, this isn't gonna work properly. So make sure you get that tightened before this slides into place. All right, with that tightened, we are going to slide our new sway bar bracket in place. And it looks like my hub is just a little bit warped here. So this will be a little bit fun. All right, so now we have our bracket on. You can see this part is dangling and loose. The next step is to put our sway bar in place. And we are going to just loosely put this in place here. You'll notice there are different holes on this. This is for different positionings when you're mounting it. I am going with the one that's directly underneath the hub here. This is going to give us the best performance while we're working on the sway bar here. And in general, the way you want the sway bar to be configured is with this as close to perfectly straight up and down with the sway bar underneath it and your hub above it like this. So if you have an angle on it like this or like this, it's going to impact how effective that sway bar actually is. What we do is just kind of lift the sway bar in place, and I like to put it in the center right here in that middle hole. That way, once we mount this up, if we ever need to adjust this one way or the other, we're gonna have some flexibility. We're gonna have some flexibility to move these holes just in case it's not perfectly straight up and down. But since we are mounting this to the subframe, this is our opportunity to make sure that it is in fact perfectly perpendicular like this. Oh, hi there. So the next step we have here is actually mounting the sway bar up into place. Now, one bit of consideration is that this sway bar is made to fit with center exit exhausts, and it will still fit with most stock and mini exhaust systems. However, you might run into a little bit of different behavior depending on the type of exhaust you have and the whole configuration of your car here, but namely the size of your exhaust. Now, in my case, I've got a 2-inch exhaust, which is very uncommon in a Mini. Normally you have 1 inch and some change. Even with the aftermarket ones, this one is targeted specifically for big bore or turbocharged engines, but as a result, it doesn't fit. So what we're gonna have to do is add a few spacers here. Now this is something that you might have to do on your car, but it's not something you always have to do. And don't worry, it's not that difficult. Okay, so let's talk about how this mounts. You have basically a small like C-clamp sort of style and a rubber bushing that goes inside this. This goes upside down and clamps the roll bar to your subframe. You then drill holes through your subframe and run some bolts through it. Now, the kit comes with mounting hardware, so you would be able to do this if you don't have to add a spacer. In my case, I'm going to be adding a spacer here, and the spacer is built out of block aluminum or aluminium, and you can see how thick that is. It's made specifically to be quite strong, but you want something that's strong. You can use steel here. I used aluminum just because it's light. If you don't have access to it, you can use milled steel. You're just going to have to treat it because, well, it rusts. So what we're going to be doing here is installing these brackets like so through the subframe. So they'll be upside down, and this will be mounted directly to the subframe. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and kind of mock this up here. We want these to be kind of in the same place on both sides of the subframe, and we can do that by kind of putting this over the roll bar, lifting it up into place, and then tightening it down. And don't forget, while we are lifting this into place, you want to keep that mount as perpendicular as possible, as straight up and down as possible. Now, granted, this is going to move around while you're driving the car, but the base setting, the closest the base setting can be to perpendicular, the better performance you're gonna get out of this whole setup. All right, now with that last bit done, we have everything installed. Now the last thing that we need to do is actually measure these to make sure that we have the right length on each side. Now, I am using just a simple tape measure here. This isn't gonna be like the absolute most accurate thing, but it is gonna get you close enough to the length that you're looking for. And basically, you want the same amount of thread to exist on each side of your sway bar mounting equipment, and this sway bar mounting equipment needs to live on the inside of the car, on this side of the sway bar. If you put it on the outside here, you'll see it's actually hitting that spring. Not ideal. We want this to sit as far away from the hub as possible, and out of the way. So that is pretty much it. This one is just a smidge longer, so I'm gonna have to just wind this in a couple spins, nothing too crazy. So 1, 2, 3. Now I thought these lock nuts were kind of funny because once you put this on here, once this is mounted in place, this literally can't spin, but you know, whatever. Lock that up after we get this in here. So the way I do that is just slide my bolt in there, just like that, and it'll kind of fight you. You might find that this has just a little bit of tension on it, which isn't the end of the world, as long as it's not like ultra tense here. And if these are the same length and you have a ton of tension on this bar, what that means is the ride height is different on the right to the left side of your car, and that's something that you'll need to adjust outside of this video, obviously. All right, so that is now nipped up and tight. We want to make sure that all the bolts on the other side are tight as well, and then we are done with this install. So let's jump back over to the bench and recap this. All right, so with that, the front and rear anti-roll or sway bars have been installed. I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. I wanted to give you guys like a first drive after installing these. However, I'm still waiting on some things for the turbo build, so I can't bring the car out. It's not drivable yet. I wanted to get this out here so you guys could see how to install the front and rear anti-roll bars on your car, and maybe this is the right mod for you. The job itself is not especially difficult. The front is way easier than the rear, namely because on the front you don't have to drill at all. The rear does require some drilling of those holes, and pro tip, I forgot to mention while I was back there, after you drill those holes, make sure you add some paint to them so you don't introduce any new rust or any sort of corrosion point on your subframe. Obviously my subframe, it's seen better days, but in general you want to do everything you can to prevent those things from, advancing too quickly. So maybe you have installed these on your car before, maybe you have a different set from a different vendor. I'd love to hear your experiences with them, and I'm gonna make this a two-part episode. One, obviously this one, showing you guys how to install it, and then once my car is back on the road, I will give you guys a full rundown and full review of these anti-roll bars on the Mini. But don't forget, I am running a turbocharger giveaway on the merch store right now. Every $5 spent right now gets you one entry to win the complete turbo kit. If you didn't see that video, it should be popping up in the corner now. And that'll have all the details about the giveaway and how to enter and all that stuff. So check that out if you haven't. But I also want to say a huge mega thank you to my long-term part sponsor, 7 Mini Parts. They sponsored this episode by providing me these parts. And if you guys like these videos, please consider checking out 7 Mini Parts. They have been sponsoring every episode of this channel for the last 3 years now, 4 years now, and they are an incredible company. If you're in North America, head over to their site. Great prices on mini parts. It's affordable for the North American market, and it'll get there quick because, well, they're in North America, assuming you are too. So, anyways, that is going to wrap up this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you have any questions at all, post them in the comments section below. But until I see you guys again, you know the drill. Enjoy those minis and motor on.